Hi, today's lesson for Eileen Chevalier's typewriter alphabet botany curriculum is scientific classification. In this lesson, we'll learn about the scientific classification system, which is a common language for organizing all living things. Like all classification systems, it's not perfect. And like all languages, it continues to evolve over time. So the materials that you're going to need for today, you can find them in the read section of your lesson guide, are Karl, Get Out of the Garden, Gregor Mendel, the Friar Who Grew Peas, and the Smithsonian Natural History, the ultimate visual guide to everything on Earth. So those are our 3 books, and you'll also need, you can see that there is the A flashcard, but we're actually going to use a few more. So you can get out your flashcards, and if you want to go ahead and pull out A, we're going to also use D, F, R, and X. So A is our main card because this is the card that talks about the scientific classification system, and then we're going to use these in the question and investigate section. All right, so we're going to just read the top of the back of the azalea card together before we go on. I want you to look there and see the classification systems for humans on the left in blue, and then azaleas in the right in red. So you can see that we actually have the same domain as azaleas. So the domain is Eukaryota. There are actually 3 domains, and we'll talk about that more later. The other 2 domains are all one-celled organisms, so we can't see them. So if you can see anything in the world around you and it's alive, then it's in the domain Eukaryota. Then under that, it says kingdom. So for us, we are Animalia, and for the azalea, it's a Plantae. And there are actually 4 kingdoms in the Eukaryota domain. They are Protista, which are also one-celled organisms, and they're tiny, and then Plantae, Animalia, and fungi, which is mushrooms, basically, is the last one. And sometimes you look in a plant book, do not be confused if they throw mushrooms in there. That is not part of the Plantae kingdom. They have their own kingdom, the fungi. In order for something to be a plant, if you remember back from the very first lesson, what is botany? Plants must use chlorophyll to make their own food, and mushrooms don't do that, so they cannot be part of the plant kingdom. All right, looking below kingdom, it gets a little confusing on the next 2. Phylum is on the human side, so we're Chordata phylum, but then the azalea is in the Angiospermae division, and we talk a lot more about this in the Angiospermae lesson, where we talk about the differences between division and phylum, and really see how they're on the same line. So it's basically the equivalent. It's just a different way of naming and maybe thinking about that. Underneath, Mammalia is the class for humans, and Eudicotyledonii is the clade for plants. But again, it's on that same line. So it's the same level of organization, right? So instead of going from phylum to class, the plants are just going from division to clade. And if you look in the DK Smithsonian Natural History book, that is how everything is listed in there. So I just kept it consistent and listed them that way on these cards. And as I said originally, like, the classification system does change. So this is probably just one of those things that's changing over time. But underneath class and clade, everything stays the same as far as what they're called: order, family, genus, and species. Humans are primate order, Hominidae family, Homo genus, and Sapien species. Sapien means wise. And then for the azalea, the order is Ericales, the family is Ericaceae, the genus is Rhododendron, and the species is Indicum. And then underneath that, there are also, with plants, there are varieties, but those aren't, they wouldn't be in a scientific classification. That's just something that gets added on. So get out your journals now, and we're going to do just one definition today. It's a little bit of a long definition though. So binomial nomenclature is a 2-part naming system that Karl Linnaeus developed in the 1700s. The first word is the genus and the second is the species. Genus is capitalized, species is lowercase, both are italicized. All right, so for the question and investigate section, today we're going to look a little bit more into the scientific classification system and try to figure that out. So Karl Linnaeus often used Latin and Greek in the classification system, but now we mix those with English. We often use English endings, so we say the word stamens, rather than using the Latin endings, so technically it would be stamina. How else has it changed? Why will it continue to change? And why? Why would it keep changing over time? I mean, the plants aren't changing, the animals aren't really changing. Like, why is the classification system going to change? So first we're going to look at the natural history book. So here on page 28 of the Smithsonian Natural History book, you can see a little bit more about classification. So they describe to you the major groups in the classification system. So the first one is domain, and then kingdom, phylum, class, like all the ones that you probably already know. But domain's really important. So we'll get into that a little bit more. Then there are, at the very bottom, it's really cool because they go through like a little bit of a timeline in the classification system. So of course, Linnaeus is in there. He's actually in the middle. There are some people who were working on things before him and then people who were working after him. So it's good to know that progression and how and why things change. So go ahead and I'm going to read to you just these things. So pay attention and see if you can see what's happening. So the first one is animals and plants. Aristotle was the first person to classify living things, and he introduced the term genus, meaning race, stock, or kin, so things that are related, genus in Latin. He separated animals into those with blood and those without, not realizing that blood need not be red. So, this division is very close to the modern classification of vertebrates and invertebrates. The second box is order from chaos. John Ray classified organisms based on their overall morphology rather than just a part of it. In doing so, he could establish relationships between species more easily and organize them into groups more effectively. He also divided the flowering plants into two major groups of orders, monocotyledons and dicotyledons. So he was 1627 to 1705. Shortly after he died, Karl Linnaeus was born in 1707. And Linnaeus, this is the third section, it's called animal, vegetable, or mineral. Linnaeus divided the natural world into three kingdoms: animals, plants, and minerals. He then devised a hierarchical system of classification based on class, order, family, genus, and species, so the one that we use today, and established the convention of giving species binomial Latin names. So binomial nomenclature is credited to Karl Linnaeus. He died in 1778. Then the next section is called A New Kingdom. Historically, organisms were classified as being either animals or plants, but in 1866, Ernst Haeckel, I might be pronouncing his name wrong, sorry. Haeckel argued that microscopic organisms formed a separate group, which he called Protista. There were now three kingdoms of life: animal, animalia, plantae, and Protista. So he was 1834 to 1919. Then, super interesting one to me, is introducing the Archaea. Recognized by Karl, and I'm totally going to mess with this name, Karl Wosa and George Fox in 1977, the Archaea are microscopic organisms that live in very extreme environments. You might have heard of these guys before. Initially grouped with the bacteria, their DNA turned out to be so unique that a new three-domain taxonomic system was introduced. So remember how I told you that above the kingdom and phylum and all that stuff, there's domain? So there are actually three domains. And sometimes people think that the other domains are actually kingdoms, but they're not. They're separate. So when we're thinking about why the classification system is changing, what is happening in each of those instances is it like a need for there to be more of a division? Is it that the science developed to a point where they understood that there was more of a difference than they thought there was? So what is it that's happening that is making the classification system change? Here is a page. It is page 90, if you want to find it in your book. And it's about prokaryotes. So pro just means before. And there are two domains in the prokaryotes. They are Archaea, which you may or may not have heard about, and bacteria, which I'm sure you have heard about. So bacteria is not a kingdom. Bacteria is a domain. It is so distinct in its DNA that it has its own domain. Then you get into Protists, and those are also super tiny microscopic life. So that is on page 94, and that is actually a kingdom because it's under the domain eukaryotes. So we too are eukaryotes. EU at the beginning of a word just means true. So it means it has a true karyote, so which is a true nucleus. So the other ones are before a true nucleus. So it's just really how the cell is formed, which you can't really see until you can see inside the cell with the microscopes. I do want to read you one thing from Karl. So Karl is the one who came up with kingdom, phylum, order, and all that. And he also came up with binomial nomenclature, which is kind of funny, the way he did it. All right, so Karl, get out of the garden. We're going to read page 12. Doctors, gardeners, farmers, everybody argued about the names of plants. Dandelions might be called blowball, swine snout, or yellow daisy, depending on which town you lived in. Some plants had 30 or 40 different names. Doctors used long, complicated Greek or Latin names for plants, but even they couldn't agree. Karl used a pretty pink rose to treat dog bites, but was it the right rose? One doctor called it Rosa sylvestris indora seuquanina. Another called it Rosa sylvestris alba cum rubore folio glabro. Chaos! Karl cried. Barbarian jargon. So there are all these different names, and when you have really long names, they can be more specific, but they also might be more complicated. Like they might get confusing. And so like this person is using one and that person is using one. So what he wanted to do was make it specific enough, but simple enough that it could be used by everyone, which is why I came up with binomial nomenclature. All right, so the next one is the next question under our question and investigate section says, look at the scientific names on each flashcard. Can you tell which come from Latin or Greek and which are named after people? So I actually did this with my daughter a while ago, and so we're just gonna like drop in that exchange that we had so you can see what she thought they were and then what they really were. And you can do this with all of your cards as well. We're gonna do 4. I wanna see if Ella can guess which one of these are someone's name and which one of these are Latin or Greek. Which of them are come from one of those really old languages. So foxglove is Digitalis Purpurea.
I think that's
or Purpurea?
name?
No. A-E is I. Purpurea. You think it's a name?
I think it's someone's name.
Okay, so we'll put it over there for name. And then the next one is Forsythia is Forsythia ex intermedia.
I think it's a name.
You think that's also a name? All right, so what about Daffodil? Oh, I should show you the card. Daffodil. Daffodil scientific name is Narcissus pseudonarcissus.
It's another language.
It's another language. All right. And what about the rose? Rosa radraz.
I think it's a different language.
Okay. Cool. All right, so how could we find out? How are we going to be able to tell?
We could, I don't know.
We could look it up.
We could look it up in a dictionary or...
Yeah. And some things we might already know that it's a name. So do you know how the planets are named? We have Pluto. Well, we don't have Pluto. Pluto's not a planet. I'm so crazy. We have
After Greek
Saturn.
gods.
Yeah, they are named after Greek gods. So sometimes, and a lot of times, especially in science, people love like all the Greek gods and Roman gods, and they just name a bunch of things after them. So maybe it was named after some historical thing, right?
Or a myth or something.
Yeah. So let's see. Let's go and see what we can find out. Rose is Rosa Radraz. So a lot of people are named Rosa. Do you think it's named after a person? Or Rose or Rosa?
Maybe.
Maybe it's named after a person, right? So I have a handy dandy Latin dictionary right here. One of my favorite books. The Cassell's Latin Dictionary. It's amazing. So I happen to have looked this up beforehand. And Ella, can you read what it says for Rosa?
Rosa. A rose.
Ah,
That one's easy.
there we go. So that one's a really interesting one because people are named after the flower, which was named after the Latin word for rose.
Cool.
All right, so that is our Latin one. Let's look at D. Narcissus pseudonarcissus. I don't know if any of you guys have ever seen this book, but it's also super fun. So this is a bunch of Greek myths. And do you remember this one?
Oh, it's the story of Echo and Narcissus.
Right. So Narcissus was what?
He fell in love with himself by staring in a mirror.
He did. He fell in love with himself. He was very beautiful. He
Kept
looked.
staring at
It's
himself
actually
in the lake.
water, but it was reflective, and that's him. So really, the Narcissus is named after this guy because a lot of them like look down.
Oh, like the daffodil hangs over?
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
So that is actually named for not a real person, but a mythological person. All right. So Forsythia is Forsythia ex intermedia. And I didn't actually really know this one, but there are people with the last name Forsyth. Mm-hmm. And William Forsyth, I'm going to make sure I'm reading this correctly. William Forsyth was a founding member of the Royal Horticultural Society in England. So this plant, the Forsythia, was named after him. So that's also a person. And then for the X, we have Digitalis Purpurea. So back to the dictionary. I looked up the first word. So for digitus, what do we have?
We have fingers.
Fingers. So forefinger,
Or
or fingers.
index finger.
All right. And then for purpurea, what do we have?
Yeah. We have purple.
Well, that's right.
Purple colored.
Yeah. So it's a purplish thing.
Purple colored.
So do you think that?
Oh, so foxglove looks like purple fingers.
Yeah. So all of the foxgloves are called digitalis, and then this one happens to be purple.
Cool.
So the other ones probably have digitalis, which is like for that finger shape,
And then white or
maybe we
Yeah,
could look
so-
that up and find out. All right. So those are our Latin ones, and then these are named for people.
cool.
All right. So the next one, the last question and investigate is, why does Forsythia, named after William Forsyth, a founding member of the Royal Horticultural Society in England, have an X in between the genus and species name? So if you want to pull out your F card, which you probably already did earlier, I haven't shown you these, but on the back of the cards, there is always the common name and then the scientific name down at the very bottom. So when you look at these, when you're doing your comparison with the names, you can look at the common name and then you can look at the scientific name. And sometimes the common name is just part of the scientific name. And sometimes it's super different. So we'll look more at that in the common names lesson. But right now, we're just going to look at Forsythia ex intermedia. So why is that X happening in the middle of the scientific classification? It's weird. It's not in all of them. It is in some of them. You'll see it. So for that, we're actually going to look at Gregor Mendel book. It looks like this. So as you can see, what he did was he, not only did he grow peas, he wanted to experiment with them, so to see what happened. So he grew all these different peas and he would do experiments with them. So he grew a bunch of green peas and he grew a bunch of yellow peas. And so these, every time you plant these, year after year, it turns, it's yellow, it's consistent. And every year when you plant these and you get these peas, they're going to keep being green. So what's happened is these peas have been fertilized by the same plant and these peas have been fertilized by the same plant. But if you take them and if you've ever seen what DNA looks like, so you have a long strand of DNA, and so you have one from the male part of the plant and one from the female part of the plant, and they combine together, right? So that makes the new plant. So you get half from one and half from another. So if you get them from the same plant, then they're going to be really similar. And if you get them from the same plant over here, this green one, those two are going to be really similar. But if you take one from each and you cross those together, then you're going to get something different. And so he wanted to see what would happen. So what happened was that the first year, they all looked yellow. They looked just like this one. So it looks like, what happened? Is it that the genes are determined by this plant? Not so, because then when he brought these together, the next generation, they had this green one, the little green one started showing up. And then when he breeded these together, all the parents were from this generation. Then he got these 4 different ones. So it goes back to this green, it goes back to that yellow, and then you get these down here. So really fascinating how the genes come together. So what's happening when there's an X there is that you have taken 2 plants that are in the same genus but a different species, and they're 2 different parents. And so they are making what's called a hybrid. So when this one right here would be the hybrid. So when the hybrid is bred with itself, it does not produce the same thing. So this is not a species into itself because it's not going to keep producing the same looking thing. Okay, so like this would be a species and this would be a species, but you're going to get inconsistent results each time when you cross them. So it involves human intervention in order to get, obviously it could happen in nature, but for you to make sure that you're going to get that particular plant, you have to be intentional about it. All right, so that is our X. Last thing is your journal. So today we have 3 different journal activities. The first one is find an interesting binomial nomenclature, draw the plant, and explain why the name intrigues you. Like maybe you really think that X is interesting, or maybe one of my favorites is the daffodil, which is Narcissus pseudo-narcissus, which really just means Narcissus fake narcissus, which is a kind of weird name. There are lots of really interesting binomial nomenclatures, especially once you learn more about where they came from. So just talk about why the name intrigues you or what your questions might be about it. Draw a plant, real or imaginary, and make up your own binomial nomenclature for it. So you can use a plant that you already have, like if you have a picture of a plant or you have a plant in your house or in your yard that you really like, you can make up your own, because this is what Karl did, right? He made up the scientific classification names. Sometimes he named them after people. If he liked someone, then he would name a beautiful plant after that person. If he didn't like someone, he would name some like really stinky plant after that person. So some plants were named after people, and some plants are named because of the physical characteristics or location of the plant. So, or even, it's more of like the physical characteristics, what it looks like or what it does. So you can make up your own, anything you want. That's what Karl did. We all just agreed to follow along with his. So now they're like, when things are named, there's like boards of people who all approve it, but you don't need that. You can just make it up and see how that feels to name the plants. The third one is to make up binomial nomenclatures for your family. Do you all have the same genus? What are the different species? What makes a person unique and wonderful? So this is really fun in our family because everyone has red hair except for me. So like you could do something about red hair for some of them, and then I would have brown hair. Or you could do eye color, or you could do activities like, do they like sports, or do they like cooking? So you can come up with like the different things that they like, or are you like just really different? Like, do you want all the people who are like sporty and outdoorsy to have one genus, and then like everyone who likes to stay inside and do things more in a homey way have a different genus? So you can kind of divide it up. But I really want you to be careful that you are, unlike Karl sometimes, I want you to be really excited about the individuality of people and just what makes them special and what important things are they bringing that maybe other people don't share those same characteristics. Like, they are really great at drawing, or they are really great at running, or whatever. So try to bring those into the names. And that's it. Thanks so much for joining us, guys, for our scientific classification lesson. The common names lesson is really similar, so if you want to do that one next, that's a good way to go. All right, see you soon. Bye.